While you're struggling, Taoism's teachings on finding your flow, imagine this. You wake up, check your phone, and immediately feel behind. The world is moving fast, people are achieving, succeeding, and seemingly gliding through life while you feel stuck, lost, or overwhelmed. You try harder, make plans, set goals, push yourself, but the more you try to control everything, the more it feels like you're swimming against an invisible current, fighting something you can't even see. Why does life feel like this? Why does effort often seem to lead to exhaustion, not results? And why do some people seem to move effortlessly through life, while others struggle at every turn? Taoism has an answer. It tells us that the root of struggle is not in the world, but in our resistance to it. But it teaches that life is like a river constantly flowing, ever changing, moving in harmony with itself. The more you fight the current, the more exhausted you become. But the moment you stop resisting, when you learn to move with the flow instead of against it, everything changes. The friction, the tension, the exhaustion, they disappear. And suddenly, life feels effortless. But what does that really mean? How do we stop struggling and start flowing? Most of us have been taught that success, happiness, and meaning come from effort. Work harder, push through, never give up. These are the mantras we repeat. But Taoism introduces a radical idea, Wu Wei, often translated as effortless action or flowing with the natural order. It doesn't mean being passive or lazy. It means aligning yourself so perfectly with the natural rhythms of life that your actions become effortless, like a surfer riding a wave rather than fighting against it. Think about the last time you did something and it felt completely natural, when you lost track of time, when things just fell into place, when you weren't forcing anything but everything was working. That's Wu Wei.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
But most of the time, we do the opposite. We force things. We try to control every outcome. We grasp, cling, resist, and exhaust ourselves trying to bend life to our will. And the irony, the more we try to control, the more out of control we feel. Have you ever noticed that the moments of greatest frustration, anxiety, or exhaustion often come when you're resisting what is? You want things to be different than they are. You wish circumstances were other than what they are, but you fight reality instead of working with it. And that fight, that resistance, is the very thing causing your suffering. But what if you let go? What if, instead of fighting the current, you learn to move with it? What if, instead of pushing so hard for what you think you need, you learn to trust that life has its own rhythm, its own intelligence? Taoism suggests that life already knows what it's doing. The river doesn't need to be pushed. The seasons don't need to be forced. Nature moves effortlessly, and so can we if we learn to trust it. But this raises a deep question. If we don't push, won't we just drift aimlessly? If we stop trying, won't we fail? This is where most people misunderstand Wu Wei. It doesn't mean doing nothing, it means acting in harmony with the moment. It means responding naturally to what is, without forcing, without clinging, without resistance. It's the difference between a skilled martial artist who moves fluidly with their opponent instead of stiffly resisting, or a musician who plays effortlessly because they are deeply attuned to the rhythm instead of overthinking every note. So ask yourself, where in your life are you fighting the current? Where are you trying to force something that isn't flowing naturally? Are you clinging to a relationship, a job, a plan, an identity that no longer fits? Taoism teaches that struggle comes not from life itself, but from our attachment to how we think life should be. The more we resist what is, the more we suffer. But the moment we let go, the moment we surrender to the flow of life, everything changes. But how do we do that? How do we let go when everything in us wants to hold on? How do we trust the flow of life when we've been conditioned to believe that control is the only way to succeed? In the illusion of control and the art of letting go, we live under the illusion that control equals security. We make plans, set deadlines, structure our lives in a way that makes us feel like we are in charge. But if we're honest, how often do things actually go exactly as we planned? How many times have you carefully constructed a future for yourself, only to see it unravel in ways you never expected? And when that happens, what do? We tighten our grip. We double down, strategizing even more, trying to mold life into the perfect shape we imagined. But Taoism tells us something profound. Control is an illusion, and clinging to it is the cause of suffering. Think about the most peaceful moments in your life, the times when you felt truly at ease. Were they moments of control, or were they moments of surrender? Perhaps it was standing before the vastness of the ocean, realizing how small you are in the grand scheme of things. Or maybe it was a conversation with someone you love, where nothing was forced and everything felt natural. These moments of peace don't come from controlling life, they come from being fully present and aligned with it. Taoism teaches that life is self-organizing, like a river that carves through mountains without needing a blueprint. The more we try to control, the more unnatural and rigid we become. And rigidity is the opposite of flow. But letting go is terrifying, isn't it? We fear that if we stop trying to control every outcome, our lives will fall apart. We fear that if we don't push ourselves relentlessly, we'll fall behind. But here's the paradox: the most successful, fulfilled, and peaceful people aren't the ones who are constantly forcing things. They are the ones who understand when to act and when to allow it. They move with the natural rhythms of life instead of against them. They know when to push forward and when to step back. Have you ever noticed how forcing a solution rarely works, but when you stop obsessing over it, the answer comes effortlessly? This is Wu Wei in action, the understanding that action and non-action are two sides of the same coin, and wisdom lies in knowing which one is needed in the moment. So why do we struggle with this? Why do we resist the natural flow of life so much? The answer lies in fear. We are conditioned to believe that life is something to be conquered, that we must impose our will upon it, or else we will be left behind. We see surrender as weakness, as giving up. But Taoism tells us that surrender is not passivity, it is deep wisdom. It is understanding that life is not something to be dominated, but something to be danced with. A great dancer does not move stiffly, forcing every step. They move in harmony with the music, responding to the rhythm as it unfolds. But how do we practice this in real life? How do we let go when everything in us is screaming to hold on? The first step is awareness. Pay attention to where you are resisting life. Are you holding on to a relationship that is no longer serving you out of fear of the unknown? Are you clinging to an idea of success that no longer aligns with who you truly are? Are you forcing yourself into a path that feels unnatural simply because society tells you it's the right way? The more you become aware of your resistance, the more you begin to see how much of your suffering is self-created. And then there is trust that life has an intelligence beyond what your mind can comprehend. This does not mean sitting back and doing nothing. It means acting in harmony with what is unfolding rather than trying to force what isn't meant to be. It means being open to change, to uncertainty, to the unknown. The river does not fear where it is going, it simply flows. And we, too, can learn to move with the current instead of exhausting ourselves fighting against it. Ask yourself, where in my life am I clinging to control? What would happen if I loosened my grip just a little? What if I stopped forcing and started trusting? The mind will resist this idea because it thrives on control. But the heart, the deeper part of you, already knows the truth. It knows that peace is not found in control, but in alignment. It knows that life is not something to be mastered, but something to be experienced fully, moment by moment. So what happens when we truly embrace this? What happens when we stop resisting, stop forcing, and start moving with life instead of against it? That is where real transformation begins. But this is not just a philosophical idea, it is something that can be applied in every area of our lives. In our work, in our relationships, in our creativity, in our daily moments. And the more we align with this flow, the more effortless life becomes. But if this is the way, then why do so many people still struggle? Why do we keep falling back into the trap of control, of resistance, of struggle? To understand that, we must explore something deeper: the ego, the identity we cling to, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Because before we can fully embrace the flow of life, we must first unravel the illusions we have built around ourselves. The ego's illusion, breaking free from the stories that trap you. Why do we resist the flow of life? Why do we struggle when we know, deep down, that letting go would bring us peace? The answer lies in the ego, the identity we construct, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what we need, and how life should unfold. The ego craves control because it fears uncertainty. But it builds walls, clings to labels, and constructs narratives that give us the illusion of stability. But Taoism teaches that these stories are just that, stories. They are not reality, and the more we attach to them, the more we suffer. Think about it. How many times have you held on to something not because it was right, but because it fit the story you had about yourself? Maybe you stayed in a job that drained you because it matched the image of success you believed in. Maybe you forced a relationship because you couldn't accept the idea of failure. Maybe you pushed yourself relentlessly, not because you truly wanted what you were chasing, but because you were afraid of who you'd be without the chase. The ego is always afraid of change, afraid of losing control, afraid of dissolving into the unknown. But Taoism reveals a truth that shatters this illusion. The self you are clinging to is not fixed. It is fluid, ever-changing, like the river itself. And the more you try to hold onto a rigid identity, the more you separate yourself from the natural flow of life. But what happens when we let go of these stories? What happens when we stop defining ourselves so tightly and allow life to shape us? At first, it feels terrifying. The ego panics, grasping for anything familiar. But then, something miraculous happens. Without the weight of these narratives, without the constant battle to uphold an identity, you begin to feel light, free. You start to move with life rather than against it. You stop forcing yourself into places you don't belong. You stop chasing things that were never truly meant for you. Instead, you respond naturally to the moment, allowing yourself to be shaped by life rather than trying to control it. This is where true power lies, not in domination, not in control, but in adaptability. Look at nature. The strongest trees are not the ones that resist the wind, they are the ones that bend with it. The ocean does not fight the tides, it moves with them. The most skilled martial artists do not meet force with force, they flow with their opponent's energy, using it to their advantage. This is Wu Wei in its highest form, not passivity, but supreme intelligence. Knowing when to act and when to yield. Knowing that true strength is not in rigidity, but in fluidity. But the ego hates this idea. It wants certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants to know that if it follows a specific path, it will get the outcome it desires. But life does not work that way. The more we try to force certainty, the more anxious we become. The more we cling to specific outcomes, the more we suffer when life inevitably takes its own course. Taoism teaches us to embrace the unknown not as something to be feared, but as something to be trusted. Because the truth is, life is far wiser than we are. The river knows where it is going. The seasons change effortlessly. The universe moves in perfect harmony without our interference. And when we learn to trust this flow, we start to experience something extraordinary, effortless synchronicity. Have you ever had a moment where everything just seemed to align perfectly? Where you met the right person at the right time, or an opportunity came exactly when you needed it? These moments are not coincidences. They happen when we are in sync with the flow of life, when we stop resisting and allow things to unfold naturally. The more we let go of control, the more life begins to guide us in ways we could never have planned. But to experience this, we must first break free from the ego's illusion. We must be willing to step into the unknown, to surrender our rigid identities, to trust that who we are becoming is far greater than who we are clinging to. So ask yourself, what stories am I telling myself that are keeping me stuck? What identities am I holding on to that no longer serve me? What would happen if I let go, even just a little? The mind will resist these questions because it fears change. But the deeper part of you, the part that already knows the truth, will recognize the freedom that lies beyond them. And once you begin to taste that freedom, once you begin to move with life rather than against it, everything transforms. But there is one final piece to this puzzle, one last illusion we must shatter before we can fully embrace the wisdom of Taoism. It is perhaps the greatest misconception of all, the idea that happiness is something to be achieved, rather than something that arises naturally when we stop chasing it. Because in the end, true peace is not found in the future. It is found in the only place it has ever existed, the present moment. The paradox of effort, finding peace by letting go of the chase we spend our lives chasing happiness, success, meaning always reaching for something just beyond our grasp. We tell ourselves that once we achieve a certain goal, acquire a certain status, or fix a certain problem, then we will finally be at peace. But Taoism exposes a profound truth. The very act of chasing happiness pushes it further away. The more desperately we seek fulfillment, the more elusive it becomes. It is like trying to catch a butterfly, run toward it, and it flutters just out of reach, but sits still, and it may land gently on your shoulder. This is the paradox of effort. We believe that happiness is something to be attained through struggle, but in reality, it is something that arises naturally when we stop resisting life. Have you ever noticed that the moments of greatest joy often come when you least expect them? Laughter shared with a friend, a quiet sunset, the feeling of deep presence in a simple moment. These experiences are effortless. They do not require striving or achieving. They simply happen when we are fully present, when we are not lost in the endless pursuit of something else. Taoism teaches us that life is already complete as it is. The river does not need to reach a destination to be whole. The wind does not need a purpose to be meaningful. And yet, we live as though we are incomplete, as though we must keep running towards some imagined future where everything will finally be right. But what if we stopped? What if, instead of constantly trying to grasp happiness, we allowed ourselves to simply experience life as it is? What if we trusted that peace is not something we need to create, but something that naturally emerges when we stop interfering with it? This does not mean abandoning ambition or refusing to take action. It means understanding that true fulfillment does not come from force, it comes from alignment. When we align with the natural flow of life, when we act from a place of presence rather than desperation, our actions become effortless. Success ceases to be a struggle. Happiness ceases to be a goal. Everything begins to unfold naturally, without the exhausting need to control or chase. So ask yourself, what am I chasing? What am I believing I need to achieve before I can allow myself to be at peace? And what would happen if I let go of that belief, even for a moment? The mind will resist. It will tell you that you must keep striving, that you cannot afford to stop. But the truth is, the peace you are searching for is already here. It has always been here. It is not in the future, not in the next achievement, not in the next success. It is at this moment, waiting for you to stop chasing long enough to finally notice it. And when you do, when you truly embrace the flow of life, when you stop resisting, stop forcing, and stop striving for something that was never separate from you in the first place, that is when struggle disappears. That is when you move through life with effortless grace. That is when you finally find what you were looking for all along.